evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to the Splainer AMA. As we all know, am a loyal Splainer subscriber, which I think everyone should be as well, because you get access to, no holds barred, no nonsense, brilliant take on everyday news without all the drama and the deterioration of mental health that we have all been experiencing over the past 2 years. Today's I am so thrilled to host because it is with Shrayana Bhattacharya, the author of Desperately Seeking Shahrukh, um, which I encountered, not the book, but the author, Shrayana, I encountered on Amit Verma's podcast, The Seen and the Unseen, and have since forged a friendship with her that she has no idea exists. Shrayana is trained in developmental economics and from Delhi University and Harvard University. And she is currently an economist with the World Bank Social Protection and Labor Unit for South Asia. So, Shrayana, first of all, welcome.
Thank you, Aditi. And let me first start by just saying thanks to Splainer and just again emphasize everything that you said about Splainer. And also to just say thanks to you, because I think you and I are forging a friendship, but I'm a big fan of your work. And I think I've been on shows and things you don't even know. But now next time I'll come and introduce myself. So this is really special for me, and more power to everything that you do. And it's lovely to see everyone here. I hope everyone is sort of on the better end of the Omicron wave. I hope. We just came out of a night curfew situation in Delhi, and I'm looking forward to using it and exercising it. But it's a pleasure to be here, Aditi, and lovely to see everyone here.
Thank you. As I said, one more time, thank you, Shrayana, for joining us. Okay, so I want to approach this, I wanted to approach this the way that I think that that also sort of gels with my general mental level, which is like a 5-year-old. And so I want to know, what is Desperately Seeking Shahrukh about, in your own words? Because from what I have read, it's a combination of it's a sort of a culmination of Shah Rukh Khan, India's lonely woman, the search for Indian women in the economy of love, which is a phrase I learned from that interview, which I am dying to ask you more about. And the story of the snapshot of India in 2022. So can you tell us how all these things connect, and two, what is this book about?
Aditi, let me first just be very transparent. This book is the hope that I will meet Shah Rukh Khan someday. To just be very honest about. I think I want to be very honest. I feel like everyone's been asking me. I've done a series of these talks, and very serious ones, of course. With economists and management and schools, and it's been fantastic. But I have to just be honest. You don't do a project like this for 15 years of your life without some semblance of partly madness, but partly I think it's just complete dedication to this idea that I've been doing research outside Mannat, and someday kisi na kisi din I will be then invited inside, right? So I want to first start by saying Desperately Seeking Shahrukh is very much my search to, at least at once, even from afar, to meet Mr. Khan. I have to be very honest about it. And I think beyond that, when the book says these women are seeking Shahrukh, to me, it's sort of a story of, well, what has women's quest for economic and personal freedom felt like? And when we say economic freedom and personal freedom, that holds livelihoods, it holds love. In the book, I'm trying to argue, like what you were saying about the economy of love, that actually we tend to think that our work outside the home and our work inside the home and our love lives are all these very different bits and pieces, but actually they're they're integrated for all of us, Aditi. I think this is true for you, for me. I mean, the way we feel about ourselves in our work life has a lot to do with the way our love lives are treating us as well. How much we love ourselves, how much people love us, how loved are we feeling, how confident are we feeling in the choices we make. And the book, to me, is essentially trying to tell a data-based, but also a more intimate portrait of what that searching and seeking looks like for a very different group of Indian women. I'm not going to claim that this contains the full truth of all Indian women. It doesn't. I was very privileged through my own work for the past 15 years to meet all these different women from very different places and different sectors of the economy, different class backgrounds, caste backgrounds, different religions. We are all so different, Aditi. But the one thing I realized, we had very little in common, but we had Shah Rukh in common to talk about. All conversation around Shah Rukh would then immediately go, no one's actually talking about him. They're talking about themselves. They're talking about the men in their lives. They're talking about their bosses, their jobs, the fact that they can't find money to watch Shah Rukh. And so to me, it is essentially a telling of what is being a woman, what is womanhood like in contemporary India, and arguing that womanhood or personhood is not like, oh, your job life is separate from your love life. The two are together. And Mr. Khan, in a way, is almost a metaphor, like a construct who sort of holds the two together. Because you can't watch Shah Rukh without a job and having your own independent income. But you also want a man like Shah Rukh who will support you in different ways. And most women don't find that in the current world we live in. And so the book is essentially, I think, is a story of just different women's quest to just find themselves, to do what they want to do, and to tell a story of womanhood in India.
So now, I mean, first of all, kudos to your drive, because it's taken you 15 years to write a book in the hope that in 3 years someone will notice it, in the hope that 7 years later you will meet Shah Rukh Khan. This has got to be the world's longest academic con, right?
Yeah.
But also, what part of your work, or where were you in life when you sort of first encountered, this sort of intersection of the idea of Shah Rukh Khan, the Indian woman, and sort of the economy?
Aditi, this is very much part of the long con. I studied economics. I think so many of us study economics. I love economics. It's actually a subject that I really feel very passionate about. And after I was trained in my master's degree, I was sent out. I was working for a feminist think tank, Aditi. This was in 2006. I was very young and I was very foolish. I was in my early 20s and I was really stupid. Like, I don't think I'm like less stupid now, but I
was just going to say, has it improved? No, we're still in the long con.
Not that much, but I think I'm good at being like, I think like I can present myself a certain way. But what ended up happening was I was sent for these research projects, and in these research projects I was sent to first the slums of Ahmedabad, and we were researching women who were making incense sticks at home, Aditi, and they were earning like a quarter of minimum wage. And I was so excited because I had learned data and I had learned how to do survey questionnaires, and I think that hubris of youth as well, and the hubris of economics, ki mujhe ab economics aata hai and I'm going to go and ask these questions. I took my questionnaire and I landed up in this neighborhood called Bapu Nagar in Ahmedabad. And all these women, Aditi, they were unionizing. They were actively fighting for their own rights. They were extremely well aware of their own economic challenges. I mean, they looked at me and they just kept rolling their eyes like, why are you asking us these questions, which are just so obvious, like they were all very nice to me, but it was very obvious to me that they were so bored. And they just thought, why is this girl, another girl wearing khadi with kajal has come, and they've seen people like me now so many times, and so then I realized this is just such a disastrous enterprise, so let's take a break. And when you take a break, as in market research or any research they teach you, then you start talking about things you have in common. And I started asking everyone about their favorite actor. And Aditi, everywhere I went, I met Shah Rukh fans, and I'm a mad fan. And suddenly I noticed that when we started to talk about Mr. Khan, just the energy, the texture of the conversations just opened up. Because, if today I were to sit here and ask you to tell me about, or tell me all the deprivations that you feel, you'll be like, why are you asking me? You don't even know me. Why are you asking me these questions? I think people are much more interested in talking about the things that give them joy, right? Or things that really make them come alive, than things about just their poverty and their labor conditions that they already know about. And so as a consequence, we started talking about Shah Rukh. But then what surprised me, Aditi, so this started in Ahmedabad, it happened again in rural Uttar Pradesh, then in forests of Jharkhand. I met different women in very different places. Some were domestic workers migrating from Jharkhand to Delhi. Some were home-based garment workers in rural UP. And what I realized, and I decided then to collect these stories because I just love the way we were talking about him, and I love talking about him. I can talk about him ad nauseum. And I realized, and so I started making notes, and I told them that I might convert this into a book, or maybe at that time I was thinking something a bit more academic. And they just looked at me like, okay, fine, we'll help you out. And we
okay,
kept in
khadi
touch.
kurta
Yeah,
lady,
exactly. This we can talk to you about. And so between 2006 to 2013, I just did these repeated interviews with them. I followed them through time. Each time Shah Rukh would have a release, we'd chat each time. And typically it's always around festival season because his big hits always used to come out during Diwali or Eid. It's always that period. And when I took a step back, Aditi, in around 2012-13 to look at all the notes, I realized that actually all these conversations that were like about, our celebrity crush actually revealed some very serious truths about women's economic conditions. Because as I said to you in the beginning, when they were talking about Shah Rukh, they were fundamentally talking about how difficult it was to just stand on their own two feet, to earn money, and to do something so simple as buy a cinema ticket. We think it's so easy, but I really hope people read the book and realize how incredibly tough that is for 80% of the country. Um, the other thing I realized when they were talking about Mr. Khan is they were actually using his icon, because nobody knows him, to critique the men in their real lives. Like nobody is like Shah Rukh, but why are you not like Shah Rukh? Because my man does XYZ, right? It was this very interesting way to critique love, masculinity. And I think that's when it hit me that this was a story not about Shah Rukh Khan. I mean, I'm too ordinary a fan to write anything sort of analytical about him. I've tried in the book through the help of others. But I realized this was actually a women telling me, using him as almost common language and frameworks, right? To talk about men, money, misogyny over nearly 15 years that we'd all like sort of kept chatting with each other. And that's how the book emerged. But it was a set of accidents which started with my hubris around research, and then it went somewhere completely different.
That's so interesting that you bring up, and maybe we'll come back to that point later, but you bring up how they're just bored of like when you go to do your research with your khadi kurta and the kajal in your eyes, and they're like, don't talk to us about what we are already living.
Yeah.
Escape with us into this world.
Yes.
And that's so interesting because it's also a sort of a very nice statement on you've included an incredible sort of cross section of women in your book, who you talk about, but it also it's also sort of so nice and telling about the way we perceive each other as women, this large mass of people, and then you find the thing in common, and that's this man, or the iconography of this man.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Aditi, I'll just say two things on this. I think, we in social science, the way I'm trained, right, we're always told that, of course, you have to look at difference. And it's very important in a country as unequal and divided as ours. Of course, it's important to acknowledge difference. But, loneliness doesn't have a different shape based on whether you're like in Gujarat or in Jharkhand. Feeling frustrated with your boyfriend actually is a very similar experience, irrespective of where you are or what's happening. I think there are things that we have in common. And I think with the book, I really wanted to sort of try and see, well, where is this common ground? And of course, it's tough to do because we are such an unequal country. But I was so committed to this idea that I really wanted to find some common ground. And I think in Shah Rukh, we found this sort of moment of solidarity, where everyone, all these women in the book, if anybody says anything bad about him, they will just stand up and start defending, right? And that was beautiful. I thought, well, at least this is the one thing, and it's the power of Bollywood, that it's the one thing that seemed to unite us, despite the fact that we were so different.
So okay, why Shah Rukh and why not say a Salman or an Amir? Akshay, let's not go.
Are you seeing my smirk and like general? वो कौन है? ये कौन है? No, I'm number one. I'm sure if a Salman fan went into the field and decided to do this, they could write Desperately Seeking Salman. Good luck to them. I'm not interested in that project. I'm not a fan. I actually say this in the book, Aditi, I really believe this. The three of them, right? And they are, of course, extremely powerful when it comes to just defining popular culture. So I take back all the dismissive things I said in the beginning, because you never know. When I'm invited to Mannat, maybe the two of them will be there. But kidding.
They're on this call.
Yeah, of course, exactly. So one has to be very careful. I'm quite scared of anyone in Bollywood, to be honest. But, the one thing I have realized is if you look at the three of them, and I say this in the book, Mr. Amir Khan, his celebrity seems to be, very much this masculinity of productive professionalism. He picks these great roles, great scripts, meaningful cinema, all that jazz. Like what I think Western audiences always think is like a good actor, right? And I think Indian elites increasingly think that's a good actor. And then if you look at Salman, it's sort of very much the stoic masculinity of I will beat you up. He has a few tender moments in his films, but largely it's brute strength. I'm really, and in his public persona, he's very wry, witty, doesn't really talk that much. Yeah. But if you look at Shah Rukh Khan's icon, it's very much someone who's very aware of how women are seeing him, how men are seeing him as well. He's very, it's a icon of anxiety, vulnerability, feeling very, very seen, right? Like he's very conscious of the gaze of the other. And maybe I'm the kind of person who really just connects with that. I notice, I think the women in the book certainly do. I think this may be true actually why a lot of women do connect with him, because I mentioned this in the podcast I did with Amit, that it's really, to me, it's the supply and demand in a way of his icon, which is that I think there are so many women who feel so either unheard or unappreciated in their real lives, that they see this other man who's sort of shedding tears and speaking his feelings. And they're dealing with a masculinity in their real lives which doesn't really shed tears and speak their feelings. And I think they like that, and I think so I must be that kind of person, hence is Desperately Seeking Shah Rukh. I could easily see a world in which someone writes Desperately Seeking Mammootty, or any of like the big South Indian stars as well, and there's so many. But I am a Shah Rukh fan, and hence that is the way this sort of came to be. And the women I met who decided to then share their lives also just happened to be Shah Rukh fans, and I think it was our fandom that connected, that created this sense of community.
I mean, and you mentioned this thing, and I think in your book also you have talked about how Shah Rukh is so conscious. I mean, Shah Rukh like mera bhai hai na.
Exactly. My best friend.
So respectfully, you call him Mr. Khan. I'm like,
I have
who's
to.
she talking about?
And I keep messing up, though, I have to say, because it's like sometimes I notice, I'll say, oh, I got it wrong. I didn't call him Mr. Khan, but I have to be, But anyway, sorry, you were saying,
But his self-awareness when it comes to how other people perceive him is also very similar to how I think most of us as women are conditioned to live. We're constantly aware of how we are being perceived, very little in our own heads, but like by somebody else, and so we sort of alter our behavior accordingly. And here was this guy who has got this open recognition of him being perceived as something by different people, and he's addressing it, which is all like quite a delight and quite a thrill. And and you also sort of like tied into sort of the economic element of it. It's like how Shah Rukh Khan is also sort of the poster child of the liberalized India, like the India that sort of came into its own in the 90s.
Aditi, can I jump in? It's a AMA. They're asking questions, son.
I was waiting for some questions to
come through, but DMing you desperately.
On Twitter.
Aditi's so in full thrall of her girl crush. She's having a Shah Rukh Khan now. Aditi's totally having her little
Mego, I'm sorry, but this was my long con to get to talk to Shrayana. I'm so sorry about this. Wait, this is it. This is the. So, let's act like the past 5 minutes.
Bole, Aditi.
The thing that I was wondering, which also, what a coincidence, Joy was wondering.
Oh, wonderful.
Joy, if you can put on your mic and join us and ask us your question.
Yes. Okay. First of all, I'm just so enthralled by this book, so I must say. And so my husband recommended this book to me, and I must be honest, I didn't know so the reason I ordered this book was, if you, in Delhi, how Bahari Sons gives out this calendar, when you buy so I had no idea what I was getting into. I thought it would be about Shah Rukh Khan, and I was just so happily and pleasantly, I've been racing through this. So I'm almost in 3 days, I'm almost done with it. So, and because I work in policy, so not economics but policy, so a lot of the things also just resonated with me so much. And I've been talking with so many of my women friends about this, that about how we've seen so much of ourselves and other people, and how heterosexual relationships and just how place of women in the world and all of that. And one thing I'm sorry, I'm just blabbering a bit, but one thing I must say really appreciate is how you have addressed the fact about how some of his movies, some of the things about his movies were problematic. Like, because I grew up, I was born in the 80s, so I think DDLJ for me was for the longest time the idea of how love is and how love should be. And then later I realized, oh, like he was like all the Raj and the Rahuls are maybe, like fuck boys too at to some extent. So you've addressed all of, so I really appreciate the fact that those have been addressed, and the fact that again, like but despite of that all the what you said, that the connect that he showcases among women, and how he's about all the nice things also that you have spoken about. So anyway, coming to my question, and I think a lot of that you addressed as well. So even and you've been working on this for 15 years. So was Shah Rukh Khan always at the back of your mind, or did it just, and I think somebody else also I saw that, did it just so happen that you, when you started talking to women, you realized this common connection and then you framed the narrative through that? Or did you start off just with somehow Shah Rukh Khan as a tool to examine the Indian society?
Firstly, Joy, thanks so much. That's a great question. I'm so glad that I'm going to send a message to Bari saying thank you through the calendar and all of that. But I'm glad you're reading it. Thanks for the feedback. No, I never thought I am a fan, but I'm not such a fan that I would sort of have thought that I would look. I never thought I would write this book. I just have to be very honest. Till the time that it reached my agent, who Shruti Devi, who's really not my agent, she's really my guide, almost like a PhD guide in this book. I had not really thought of it as this kind of text. I had some sense of what it would be, but I think it's changed a lot when we sort of edited it. I knew that I wanted to tell a story about women in the economy. I was always very committed to that. And I thought I was going to write a very academic book. But then when I met all these women who were so bored of me, as I was telling Aditi, and I started to follow them for a long period of time, I realized that actually, interestingly enough, if you think about Sachin Tendulkar, right? And you say, well, Sachin Tendulkar tells us something so important about Indian history in the 90s, right? And that period after. I felt the same about Mr. Khan, just listening to all these stories, because I realized you can't tell actually a history of Indian women, post-liberalization women, I think women of your and my generation born in the 80s. He is such an important psychological imprint. I think irrespective of the North or the South or the East or the West, because he was just everywhere, right? And he was our first post-liberalization superstar. I realized that I had to be very honest and acknowledge that to tell a story about Indian women, was it really that surprising that this man who had such a huge imprint on me, I'm not special or unique. I think all of us have probably had this kind of experience with him. Some people may not like him, some people love him, that's different, but he was present. He was there in, I think, all our lives in one way or the other. And I felt like I wanted to then tell a story, but no, Joy, it was definitely not like I started by saying I want to write. No economist would tell you they would ever think they'd write a book on a big cinema star. It just happened. And I was so moved, to be honest, by the stories that I had the privilege of hearing. And I think you're seeing that in the page as you're reading it, that I felt that this was the right way to do it. And, there is a version of this book that can be written without Mr. Khan, which is just about women in the economy. But I think that would be a very dishonest version, because he is the reason why I met all these women. And he is the reason why they were telling me about the terrible things that were happening in their workplaces and their love lives. And we were all complaining together. And so to not acknowledge his role in that language, the framing, that would be very dishonest. So it just happened. I didn't have a plan.
Thank you. And I hope to read more books by you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, Joy. And our next question is from Marianne Taylor. Marianne, if you may turn on your camera and ask us your question. Are you with us?
Marianne? Hi. Yeah,
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sure. Okay, so I think she's pretty much answered my question already. I was just curious about the first few women that Shrayana interviews in the beginning of her book. The Accountant and Gold, whose story I absolutely love. So how did you come across them? Were you actively seeking women who were Shah Rukh fans, or was it just a coincidence? So that's my question. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Marianne, and thank you for the kind words. Gold and Accountant, actually, the Accountant I met because of my job. I was working at the Delhi government before I went off to study. And she happened to be working in the Delhi government. I actually described this in the book. No, I wasn't seeking anyone at that time when I met her. So it just happened, and she was and I was essentially working with her while she was a government accountant, and then that's how we became friends. She would hum Shah Rukh songs during meetings, and that's when I knew that. And I will invariably get along with Shah Rukh female fans. It's just it's a thing. Like I may have very little to say to anybody, but if you're a woman and you're a Shah Rukh fan, in all likelihood, I know I can talk to you. Like, I think we have something in common. And so that's what happened. Gold I met at a nightclub. And by the way, this was very odd because it's very unusual for me to be at a nightclub. I just happened to be hanging out with a group of people at that time, like a certain kind of Delhi man who used to go to nightclubs, and I happened to go to a nightclub. I did not meet out of the work, as in the work in my professional life, but from all the labor that I had to do in my love life. So that is how I met her. The women I actually did actively solicit, and I was looking for Shah Rukh fans, were women much like me, elite upper middle class fans. So those are women in the first part of the book. So that's part 1, called Fantasies. Because I realized there I had to put out a call. So I just sent out, and I used this snowballing technique where one fan would then connect me to the other. And our lives, Marianne, are so stratified that usually upper caste people only know other upper caste people. So it was really interesting to me that I was essentially interviewing people who were very similar in position and privilege, but that came from an actual call for interviews. Everybody else in the book I met either through work, through research projects, and Gold I met at the disco.
All Salman Khans were rejected by like, मैं दिल में आता हूँ समझ में नहीं आता हूँ kind of lines.
Oh wow, Aditi. I think you might write Desperately Seeking Salman. I'm a bit nervous about that. Huh?
Our next question is by Nivita. Nivita, if you can on camera, I mean, put on your camera, and it would always be nice to put a face to the question. Otherwise, we're just going to assume you're Salman Khan in.
Yes. No. Hi, Shrayana. I'm so glad you're doing this. Thanks so much for doing this AMA. I have a rather general question, and so I just wanted to say I'm so glad you decided to use Shah Rukh to try and bring out the collective emotions and truths about women in India, that's regardless of their economic background. But I was wondering if eventually you think that these women might exhaust themselves, or rather be let down by comparing their love interests to someone so perfect.
Yeah, that's a great question. Firstly, thank you, Nivita. Thank you so much. I try and attack this a bit for women of our class group, actually. So in the book, there's an entire section I have where I actually say that, many of the women would tell me, and I'd notice it, that because they were such fans of his, in their actual relationships, they would be like fangirls for their boyfriends. They would put the man in their life at this like strange pedestal. And then I actually write this, that his humanity will always disappoint you because you've sort of grown into a fangirl in relationships. So I did hear that a lot. I don't think anyone in the book is exhausting themselves, but what's happening is you give up then, or you give up or you grow up, right? Like one of the two things. Doesn't mean you let go of the fantasy. The fantasy exists. People can daydream irrespective. And in a way, I think benchmarks and idealized figures, much like God actually, it's all sort of idealized tropes for you to then critique your immediate reality, right? Because no one is ever going to be perfect, but you look at that perfect to say, what is it about that perfect that's so appealing to me? And what does that say about the imperfection that's around me right now, right? Like, in a way, if you look at the book, that's actually what all the women are doing. No one expects a Shah Rukh, but they're saying, well, nobody expects a Shah Rukh in that idealized figure that we've seen on screen. But they're looking at him and they're saying, well, what is it about him that I like? And why is it that the men in my life that are not being able to give me that? what are the things, right? And then some things you have to capitulate, and some things you try and fight for, and some things maybe there's a character in the book who says her standards are as high as Shah Rukh. She will not marry anyone who she doesn't feel as strongly for, and power to her. That's fine. Those are her choices. So I did hear that a bit amongst upper class and sort of elite women, but I really got the sense, Nivita, and I say this in the book, that I think for a lot of the other women, particularly the first generation of the middle class, people like Gold, who really, like, their families just want to trap them into marriage as soon as possible, right? Like, jitni jaldi ho sake, you have to get a shadi. Shadi has to happen. It's like this tyranny of marriage. And women from low-income communities, for them, the fact that they suddenly had romantic opportunities, like they actually had choice, that you could date, you could go to a cafe. All of this was so exciting for them. You could date a Frenchman. I mean, there's a woman in the book Gold again. She has this hilarious affair, I think, with a Frenchman, which is very heartbreaking in the end, but it's also quite funny the way she narrates it and narrated it to me. I think that they were willing to endure the agony of their romantic agency as long as they had romantic agency. It was fine for them. That's the sense I got, and that's the way I wrote it, which is that it was fine if they felt exhausted looking for an ideal, or if they felt exhausted in the mating market. But they were so happy that, unlike their mothers, they actually had the choice. And then you make mistakes. I made a big mistake, and I write about it in the book. And that was fine, right? So I see what you're saying. But the sense I have, and I can't make a generalized comment, I can only talk about the women I followed in the book. What I do sense is that while there is this fangirling in relationships amongst more elite women, I think amongst women from very different backgrounds and economic backgrounds, there's almost this exhilaration that, being heartbroken is a fabulous thing, because kabhi kisi ke saath hua nahi, in my family, no one has been that heartbroken. And there was a kind of excitement to that. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it at what that means. But thanks for your question.
Thanks so much.
What about you, Aditi? Do you have anything to say about the heartbreak of, being...
I mean, I guess, what I'm worried about? I'm worried that we're going to start thinking that Shah Rukh Khan is setting the bar too high and that's really not true, because the bar is actually super low. Like,
yeah, I completely agree with that.
The bar is horrifically low, and the fact that Shah Rukh Khan is a bar, it's not even a very high bar. He's just a bar right now. Yeah. And he just happens to sort of coincide with the economic, the market, and the emotional I wouldn't even say cultural liberalization, the emotional and market liberalization of our country and women coming into our own. And this is one thing, Shrayana, please correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that that I've been constantly told is that, right now, men are very threatened by women, because women have a lot of conversation about, empowerment, and there's a lot of role models that they can look up to. Yeah. And every time that men are told, be a man, you're like, which man do I be like? Because every man is faulty, and every man, has something problematic about him. And the fact that there is a center resting place, for Indian masculinity in between that, like the stoic sort of physical masculinity of Salman Khan, and then the that capitalist fueled perfection masculinity of Amir Khan. The fact that there's an emotional center is actually heartening. Sorry, I just rambled.
No, that's actually that's
you know what I'm saying.
No, I do, and actually that's really well put, Aditi. I really do think you should write Desperately Seeking Salman or something. But
it's gonna happen.
Yeah. But no, but what I did want to say is, I think it's a couple of things. One is, I recently saw Decoupled, which is that Manu Joseph written show, right? Oh. And I, at a point of time, I used to really admire some of his early writing, and then I saw the show because I was curious about I really wanted to see who is this man, and like, what are the women that have been written. And you see that show and you realize this kind of woman that I think a lot of upper caste elite men are very afraid of, I think, which is, she's really successful. There's this kind of frigidness. She's really beautiful. But there's this kind of emotional, sort of almost isolation. The woman in the show is not a very expressive, chatty, talkative woman. She's very drawn into herself. To be perfectly honest, I haven't met very many women like that in real life. I wonder if they really exist. I mean, maybe they do, and I haven't encountered them. So I think there is this prototype in a lot of men's minds, particularly elite men, that there is this woman who has so given up on men that she doesn't need them, and she's sort of withdrawn. And I think the show, actually, that lady that he's drawn and etched and written, I found it very instructive, because I was very curious about what is this trope of femininity that's been created. And I think it is this very frigid, withdrawn person. And I think obviously that's very frightening, because we are still in a culture where men feel they are entitled to women's bodies. They are entitled. Look at the conversation on marital rape as an example. I mean, they feel that this is an entitlement, right? Sadly, we are still there. And so I think so there's this kind of woundedness in the masculine, because you are set up to believe that you can have everything. You have unlimited access to women's bodies and their hearts and their emotional energy. But increasingly, you now feel that there is a woman who has just decided that she doesn't want you, like she just doesn't need men, and that really frightens them, I think. And so a lot of the bad emotional behavior, I really feel sometimes it just comes from there. So that's one. I think as for role models on masculinity and what you said about, the centering, I'm really not sure. I mean, to me, I look forward to those who study masculinity very closely. I don't, not right now. Because one of the things that really is intriguing to me is I think now a lot of male role models are coming from our politics, which has, its own sort of really deeply worrying trends and phenomena. I really do believe, like, sometimes when I listen to the things people say about politicians, it really does sound like they're talking about Bollywood stars, men. And I actually say this in the book, that everywhere I met a female Shah Rukh Khan fan in like rural UP, I would find a boy who would talk about our current prime minister almost exactly the same way. Like they would look at him in that way, right? And so I think a lot of the models of masculinity increasingly, I don't know whether they're coming from scripts of cinema. I think they're actually increasingly perhaps coming from politics and maybe to some extent sport. I don't know. I don't want to make like some exhaustive comment. But I think there is this masculinity that's really frightened of economically independent women, because there's this belief that that means that we don't need you. As opposed to then taking a step back to say, well, maybe instead of not needing you, maybe masculinity also needs to change as femininity has evolved, because we have all evolved. We are exactly what you said, Aditi. We are all sitting together and talking, and there's a very different kind of space, and we have expectations that are much higher. I think Shah Rukh sort of captures that a little bit. And I think men are yet to sort of fully adapt to that. I think one very sort of knee-jerk reaction is to then think that all these women are frigid and uppity and unavailable, and be really angry at them. And I think we see that anger in our politics right now.
Actually, I have two things. One is I have like a funny Manu Joseph story.
Oh, go for it.
I did a review. This is I spent 20 years in the States or whatever. I didn't know who was anybody, man. I just came out like I was a clueless kid when I left. I was 17 when I was left. I came back at 40, right? So I wrote basically a review of this book that I was given, Serious Men, and I said it's misogynistic. I said it is. I said it's misogynistic in its ideas of women. It's misogynistic in its storyline. I said, look at the female characters, look at the male characters. Apparently, Manu Joseph went around Delhi complaining that I maligned him and slandered him. He actually went to people and said, how can Lakshmi say that to me? I'm the son of a single mother. I understand women better than anybody. How can she? And it's so interesting, right? So that it's so interesting for me that he used his single mother as a sort of way to respond to criticism about gender in his book, as though somehow his mother gave him a pass, right? Which was weird to me, because I wouldn't say, if someone said to me, if I wrote a book and they said, you're really sexist in the way you write men, I wouldn't say, but I love my father. My father's amazing,
Some of my best friends are men.
Oh yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to say is, because I'm older and that struck me, I was the generation that was cursed with Amitabh Bachchan.
Oh, that is truly a curse.
Yes, imagine. Right?
Yeah.
Amitabh Bachchan being held up as sort of an ideal of masculinity. I mean, the most closed off, unemotional, kind of ungiving machismo. And I wonder, and I just wanted to look very quickly, because it's not about me. whether Modi sort of represents a sort of return to that kind of masculinity. And that's why men feel like, they don't have an Amitabh Bachchan, like, kind of person, like, what is it? I don't know how big his chest is, 56-inch chest, and, all of that. It's a very, to me, it sounds like a very AD kind of, version of, and whether there's a sort of huge nostalgia, is like, where have the real men gone? And that's, and sort of Modi kind of epitomizes that. And he's also that generation, right? He's an older generation.
What I will say, Lakshmi, to me, and maybe Aditi and others here may have more to say. I'll say two things. I think that when it comes to masculinity, I really feel a lot of this also has to do with the fact that men's roles in sort of our society and even the economy are under a lot of attack. So we were living in a world where men had some kind of assured breadwinning role. They no longer do. Jobs are so insecure. And I think part of this is that, they're reacting to look for even stronger figures because they're feeling that they're on shaky ground. And I think that can then it could even be Akshay Kumar, it could be, politicians, it could be a very different kind of masculinity. So I see what you're saying about the AB parallel, but I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact that men's place in the economy as well has become really precarious. It's unsure, right? And I think given that masculinity derives so much status and power from money and a certain kind of, power that has, when that slowly starts to get attacked or is becoming precarious, I think we're seeing a lot of that. So, which is why I really believe, I think so much of the problems that what we're seeing lies in the job market. But obviously nobody really, I don't know what we're doing on employment policy right now, but that's one. And the second thing I will say is that the confidence with which, and I joke about this a lot in the book, the confidence with which upper class men in particular will speak on women's issues and how like women ought to think. I wonder if, I think it might be unparalleled in India compared to, I don't know what it's like in other countries. I honestly, but I can say like I spent a fair amount of time with French people and I spent enough time with Americans, and I just don't see the same level of confidence that I see sometimes amongst my Indian male peers to speak on women's issues and critique our ability to speak. Sometimes I really don't see that, but I'll stop there.
It's also because, I mean, I feel like we don't have enough comebacks. It's really as simple as that. Like, we don't have enough space to come back to, parental figures or like seniors, because I think we're also very deeply hierarchical, So it's like, then you don't want to piss anyone off. Okay, like, bolne do usko, hum nikalte hain yahan se. But back to the AMA, this is an interesting question from Tulika Tripathi. Tulika Tripathi, if you may. No, I apologize.
Yes.
Our question is by Madhurima Das, who has a question centered around self-worth for women and whether it's influenced by economics and relationships. Madhurima, if you can. Hi, Madhurima.
Hi, hello. Firstly, thank you so much for doing this. I'm quite a social recluse, so my partner got me the book and he booked this talk for me. And today at 5, he said, "Did you get an email?" I said, "Email from?" He said, "Splainer." I said, "Okay." And he said, "Go attend the talk." So I'm here. I'm a huge Shahrukh fan. And Shrayana, I completely identify with the thing as a 17-year-old saving up pocket money to actually watch his movies first day first show. Right? From there to meeting somebody who is not a SRK fan, but who bore the brunt of sitting with me for every SRK movie to date, more or less. And, so when I'm obviously waiting to dig into the book, but my question is this. I also teach psychology and public policy students, and it's very interesting when you talk about how women look at economic freedom, right? So, and for me, the self-worth component is something I constantly have 22-year-olds ask me that, who do we approach? The moment we talk, people say, you're too feministic in your ideologies, and they're like, we're looking for women who can mentor us in that field. But they also say that, do women across age groups associate this self-worth to the ideal stance of the relationship in their mind? And the other thing is the self-worth more of an economic phenomena, in your opinion, or do you think it's primarily a social conditioning?
Okay, so firstly, Madhurima, thank you so much. And please thank your partner for me. This is wonderful. I have a couple of things to say on this. One is, I've realized so much, and I think, when Aditi asked me, why did I write this book? I mean, of course, it's to meet Mr. Khan. Again, I'll keep saying that all the time. But on a more serious note, I really felt that even if it's me with all my economic privileges or women who are really struggling, there is a very serious crisis of confidence and self-worth that women are facing across our country. Maybe it's a global phenomena, but I've studied the women that I followed, the women I have, and I can only speak to the experiences I've seen and known. And there's, probably better than me, which is that there's depression data and data on suicides that are also very highly signals that there's something very wrong with the way notions of, owning your own desires and expressing them and actuating them is working. Locus of control studies, right? Like what I think your colleagues would call it. Now, given that, I actually really, and this is where I really believe, often when we talk about jobs for women, there's this idea that, oh, it's instrumental because then the economy will grow, right? So more women work and then more people are working, more incomes. I don't approach it like that. I think in the book, one of the key things I'm arguing is that a job is very useful for many of the women in my book because it is a way for them to feel worthy and meaningful. It has nothing to do, of course, it's great for the economy, all of that is terrific, they'll pay taxes and all of that. But to me, what was really special about the stories I heard in the book was that it felt like, with a job, you can make new friends, you can meet, potential lovers. Even if no one in your family appreciates you, you'll appreciate yourself at your job. Like, and it's not, and sometimes it's also not about, perhaps not everyone can follow their passions, but even if you just go to an office, the fact that you have to meet people outside, right, of your regular routine, it opens up spaces psychologically for you, like just because the body is out, right, in a funny way. And so to me, I think the question of self-worth is deeply tied up with how much we encourage women to just actuate ambitions, right? And I think right now we have an economy and a society that really doesn't, it just stifles women in this, like, study, get married, have kids, and then that is sort of the milestone of your life. Men, I think I actually say that men have more freedom to perhaps, what I think Trevor Noah called it, and I sort of quote what he said. He calls it a hyphenated self, right? And I really love that because it's true. Like, men can be accountants, plus they can be husbands, they can do different things. Women are always told, well, no, being a mother is your primary space, then you can study psychology, then you can teach psychology, right? And I think to me, self-worth is deeply correlated with the jobs and the job storylines. That's one. And I think the second part is, unfortunately, I think the way heterosexual romance currently works, and I can only say about heterosexual romance based on everything that I've seen, going back to this wounded masculinity, we have a current generation of very insecure men, especially amongst, we just have to acknowledge it for what it is. Look, just go on the internet, you know what I'm talking about. We have very insecure men who are very scared of, I think, a certain kind of woman. And I think because of that, what's happening is that the mating market is actually really vicious, I find, to a lot of women. Especially women who want to actuate their professional ambitions. There's all kinds of really bad emotional behavior and hygiene. And I think the solution out of that, the burden should not be placed on girls. I think the burden should be placed on boys. They have to learn to be okay with stronger, more confident women. It goes back again, perhaps, to that job story, because there's studies that show that as mothers work, their sons grow up to be more progressive, right? So I think that part of it is sort of, socialization and more psychological interventions, perhaps around men and young men, right? Like shaping them, peer effects. And the other is the jobs agenda. So I think self-worth, we don't think of it as like the economy has something, but I really believe the economy can really do a lot for women's sense of self-worth. And I really look forward to sort of that aspect of the conversation growing. Thanks, Madhurima.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Our next question is by Tulika Tripathi. She has a question on your encounters with SRK fans who were men.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you so much, Aditi. Thank you. Hi, so major SRK fan as well. I got the book just yesterday, so I can't wait to dive in. I haven't read it yet, so I don't know if you speak about this in the book. However, like, because you kind of had your radar out for SRK fans and you were kind of collecting and curating these stories, did you encounter like men who were SRK fans? Did you find that they were like a different breed, or like did they also have, I'm sure they did, but like to what extent did they have like these toxic masculine traits that we see are celebrated amongst other actors or amongst other like male role models?
Thanks so much, Tulika, and enjoy the book. Tulika, I was very clear one of the things, while I didn't have Shah Rukh in my mind, I had womanhood in my mind as a book I wanted to write. So I was very interested in that. And so I did not reach out specifically to male fans and to follow them. But what happened was that I went to Mannat, and I'm dying to be back in on Bandstand, because one of the most joyous parts of the research process used to be I used to hang out outside Mannat and I would talk to people. It's the last chapter of the book. It's called Madness and Mannat. It's the second last chapter. And I used to talk to people who'd line up for the birthday celebration, because it's manic, right? Like all these people show up. And I remember every time I'd go, I noticed that crowd is heavily masculine. So he has a giant male fan base. Many of them come from North Bengal. I have a sense of the statistics of them. Like I know where they come from. Funnily enough, Andaman Nicobar Islands have a huge male fan base of Shah Rukh's. There are men in North Bengal as well. Big fan bases. Lots of fan clubs come from there. Parts of Maharashtra, Gujarat as well. And I interviewed these men, and they all had very different. Some of it was similar to, like, say, Salman about being a strong man. A lot of this about fanboys in India around film stars is that many men feel that when they've been rejected by women, because men have also been rejected by women, right? They feel that these actors sometimes in their roles kind of capture that pain, right, of being rejected. So I know some of them really connected with Shah Rukh as well as Salman, actually, because of that. They value him for his success. Some of the scripts are very similar between men and women. One of the men said to me, who I interviewed, he said, वो अपने brain पे ज़्यादा ध्यान देते हैं, body कम बनाते हैं, which of course has changed now, but with everything I'm hearing about Pathan, I mean, not that he's not focusing on his brain, but there's a lot more focus on the body. But I heard a lot of that. But I think on sort of his male fan base, I'm doing a series of events very soon with fan clubs, there's a good mix of men and women. So I'll have to circle back to you on this, because I think I'll be interacting with them much more through that. But there's a lot about this in that third and second last chapter about being outside Mannat. And the fact that actually there's a reason, I won't tell you, I won't give it away. There's a reason why that space outside Mannat is very masculine. And you have to read the book to find out. But thanks for the question.
Yeah, I can't wait. Thank you so much.
Also, I like being a fan of Shah Rukh Khan is a great Bumble filter. So I'm like, you know what? Swipe left if you're not a Shah Rukh fan.
Yeah, Aditi, in fact, there's a line in the book which someone said. She said to me, she said, I have a very good sort of radar for men. If the man is a Shah Rukh fan, he's usually progressive. If he's a Salman fan, he is bad news. If he's an Amir fan, he is a bearded liberal who is obsessed with his own voice. And so, and she said, my test rarely fails. So there we go.
That's, you know what? That's like pretty accurate. That's a bearded liberal in love with their own voice is also ironically Manu Joseph.
I don't want it to seem like we're bashing him. I don't want to say, I want to say this one thing though. Yeah. Anyway,
I did this Shrayana. She's like,
You know, I mean, like, again, Manu Joseph is one of those people, like, I'm like, you are the wine and cheese liberals that you're whining about. I don't understand how you're so upset with yourself that you're.
But
you know,
I do want to know. Yeah, but you know, Aditi, what I do want to know is, I'm very curious. I will continue to read this kind of work and just see the things that are made, because I'm very curious about what is this idea of the woman. You know.
Yeah.
Decouple was very instructive for me for that. But anyway.
But anyway, this is why Netflix is in trouble in India, right?
Luxury is just not
the root of all your troubles. This very South Bombay, South Delhi kind of man. Just stay away from them.
Yeah, I know. Although, anyway, that's a long story. Go ahead, Aditi.
Yes. Our next question is, it's by Sharanya Gautam. Sharanya, if you can just turn on your camera and ask us this question. You're on mute, Sharanya.
Hi. So I might be not very clear because I'm outside. I must say before I ask my question that I'm pretty neutral about SRK. I've never been a fan, but I don't dislike him either. But I'm a fan of cinema, and I love how cinema molds society and vice versa. So when this whole Aryan Khan thing was happening, I was just browsing the internet and I chanced upon this interview of SRK with Simi Garewal. And in true Simi Garewal fashion, it was very personal, and he was talking about his mother and how close he is to his mother, and how he celebrates the women in his life, his mother, his sister, his daughter, his wife, etc. And at that time, Aryan Khan was, I think, just a newborn baby. He was probably 2-3 weeks old, and that was his first interview after his son was born.
Yeah.
And Simi Garewal asked him something, and she's like, I want him to grow up and be a bad boy, and I want him to grow up and do drugs and sleep with all the women in Bombay, and I want to something like that. I'm paraphrasing, and I'm going to tell all my female co-stars that they should keep their daughters safe from my son and things like that. So it just got me wondering. My immediate reaction was, what would happen if he had given that interview today in the age of Twitter, and when we are when we are basically bashing anybody who says anything we don't like. But on the other hand, I'm really curious to know, when you're writing this fan book, so you're basically putting him at the center of this book about this feminist book, and you're saying that he's representing a certain kind of masculinity. How do you deal with contradictions in SRK? Contradictions in SRK's personality.
So firstly, Shrayana, that was a joke. I mean, if you watch, I've seen that interview, and in fact, it was really horrifying when his son was in jail. This particular interview did the rounds with like the right-wing trolls of the internet, who were constantly mentioning this, and it was a joke. I said, if you even watch him, he's sort of, there's a joke in which. So I think number one, we should really be very careful, because context is everything, and we should be very careful about what we take on board as like a serious script and what we actually see as a joke. And so that's one. And he's always been joking. In fact, there are lots of things that he said which are like not politically correct jokes, but they're very funny. And so so number one, I don't even take it seriously enough to sort of treat it as a text. Having said that, he is not at the center of my book. The women are the center of my book. He is, as I mentioned right in the beginning, he is very much language, the way I can organize the story, and he is what in a way unites these different women and their stories together, right? So that's one thing that is really important to me. I'm not interested in talking to these women to learn what they think about Shah Rukh Khan. That's not my interest at all. My interest is to see what is it about Shah Rukh Khan that helps these women tell stories about themselves, because I think the best icons have always allowed us to tell stories about ourselves. And I think he's a very powerful icon when it comes to that. Having said that, he is not a feminist icon. I actually say this in the book very clearly. He's not a feminist icon, but he is a female one. And he's not a feminist icon precisely. I think one of the people who asked a question right up in the beginning, she said, in the book, I'm very transparent about acknowledging, really not women-friendly aspects of his iconography. I mean, be it the stalking, the harming of women, putting them in suitcases, even the glorification of ritual, right? There's a kind of religiosity in his movies. There's a lot of stuff going on, which I don't think anyone would then say, but he's not a feminist icon because of that, but he is a female one, because if you look at the way he engages with women, I measure actually how much women speak in his films relative to these other films, which are paraded as being apparently feminist, but you have men talking through all of them. Barely are women speaking. There's more space for women to express themselves. There's more space for women to talk to men. He's listening to them. There are more female characters in his movies as well. And I think women respond to that. The reason they like him is not just because of him in isolation. I think they like him because they see the way he's treating women. So you have to have women in the film, right? If you're going to treat them a certain way. And so I think for me, it's very important to just acknowledge it for what it is, which is it's not, of course, it's not a feminist icon. I would never, that's not something we could say. But having said that, one thing I really do want to highlight though is that, I think maybe it's because of the way celebrity journalism is done in India. We're always told that like fans of celebrities are these mute love added spectators who will just like love everything about the actor, right? Like, so if you like Amitabh Bachchan, you just like everything he's done and you just are so besotted and bewitched, right? You've been seduced and entranced almost in a way, like jadoo ho gaya, right? But actually, when you hear the stories in the book, you'll realize nobody is like that. Each one of us have things that we like about Shah Rukh. There are things we don't like about Shah Rukh. And in fact, it's really interesting to me that the female gaze towards him, like what are women choosing to ignore and what are women choosing to highlight for themselves? Some women in the book haven't even watched all his films, right? So they look at certain things that they like. For some, he's just a beautiful man. For others, he's a well-spoken man. For some, he represents fidelity. For others, he's just got a great sense of humor. Like, people are picking and choosing, like any of us. And I think what actually was interesting to me in the book is, in that process of picking and choosing, Shrayana, you learn so much about the person, because it tells me then, like, what are you drawn to and what are you trying to sort of create for yourself, right? So I fully hear you when you say that, how do you sort of balance in the writing of, if you're trying to frame a book where the icon has a role to play as a research framework, perhaps, how do you balance it? I think I balance it very clearly in the book by simply saying that no one would claim the icon as feminist, but it's definitely very female friendly and women love him, and they're constructing him. Nobody knows him, but they're constructing him. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll be reading that book starting tomorrow. I downloaded it today.
Super, enjoy it. And it was a joke, remember, Simi Grewal, it was a joke.
No, but see, that's the thing. I just want to point out that maybe that depends on whether you're watching that interview as a fan or not. Because I have no feelings for SRK and no feelings against him. At least I think
that's fine.
So so I was just, I mean, I would not want to react to that interview, but I was just wondering, okay, what if we had said this today? What would happen?
Oh, no one can say anything today. I mean, the fact that so many of the things we are saying right now, we're going to get into trouble. Like, we say anything. I mean, anything will become a problem. But having said that, I think on the interview, what I will say though is that I think, my sense is that, and it's not just, being a fan or anything like that, but I think we should always give there has to be, I think we've lost that sense of just giving some generosity of, doubt to the other person and not immediately thinking that, and I'm very sensitive to that interview, particularly because when his son was arrested, it did do the rounds in a certain way. But thank you and enjoy the book.
Yeah. Thank you.
Aditi, I'm so excited to see you back. Having tech issues.
I never want to. If you ever hear me complaining about tech issues, it was my driver.
Okay, so you have the last question. You wrap everything up. We're done.
Wonderful. So, first of all, thank you everyone who asked questions. If you are not already members of Splainer, you should become members of Splainer. You should gift one to your friends. You should gift one to your relatives who are constantly passing you links, dubious links, no doubt, about random things on the internet. Gift them a subscription. It will, it'll help. It'll help in the larger scheme of things. Thank you so much, Shrayana, for joining us for this AMA. This was absolutely, this was a lot more fun than I anticipated it would be. I thought we would get really academic, but we managed to get really academic and get really informational and have fun. At least I did. I don't know if I'm speaking for everybody in the audience. And of course, everyone, please purchase a copy of Desperately Seeking Shah Rukh. I want to end this by thanking you for being that person due to which so many women or so many people who've picked up the book have said, I wasn't even a Shah Rukh fan before I read this book.
Yeah.
And now I am. So just wanted to, from one Shah Rukh fan to another, just a heartfelt thank you for writing this book. And we cannot wait for the eventual Netflix series that will come out of this.
Yes. Hopefully produced by Red Chilies. So I'm sending, firstly, let me just say, Aditi, thank you so much. This was so special. I will find you at your next show. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you, Lakshmi. Everyone, please join Splainer, High Time. And the one last thing I will say is, if anybody knows Mr. Khan, you know where to find me.
I actually tried to get him. I tried to get him on the Zoom because I don't know how my stupid, pointless boyfriend who does stupid, pointless entertainment things actually knows Shah Rukh Khan. If you actually Google him, Rab Singh, he has Shah Rukh Khan holding his hand like this, going like this.
Okay, Lakshmi, now you're just
showing. I hate you. No, I forced him. I nagged him. I said, you have to message his manager. You have to message his manager. Please, please, please. Can you just get him on for 5 minutes? And then she just blanked him, man. So that was the end of that.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you, Lakshmi, for trying.
But I did my best. I did my best.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We'll see you outside Mannat, everyone.
Yes.
For sure.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Shrayana. Thank you, Aditi. I always have such a blast. I feel like I don't know what excuse we might have, but we should keep doing this.
Yes, please. Yes, please. I agree.
Maybe we should do a Splainer meet outside Mannat. All of us outside.
I totally support this. I've already told my publishers that I want to do an event outside Mannat because no one will let us have an event inside.
जगराते कर रहे मन्नत के बाहर.
Exactly. हमारे वो discourses चल रहे होंगे outside.
Okay, fine. So next, I'm planning it now, guys. I'm like serious. We're gonna
I'm serious
stand outside Mannat, and we're gonna like sit there and just like do full Shah Rukh Khan drama. All right. And Shrayana will keep saying, Mr. Khan, Mr. Khan.
Ooh, yeah. I'll try. We'll see what happens.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe, everybody. Bye.